10 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Lucinda Horsley.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. It's 8:04. Welcome to Wednesday's edition of Cross Question. I'm Iain Dale. Let me introduce you to my panel. Joining us via Zoom is Andrew Pearce, assistant assistant editor. I just demoted him at the Daily Mail, and of course my colleague on LBC. Councillor Darren Rodwell is leader of the London Borough of Barking and Dagenham Council. Olivia Utley is assistant comment editor at the Daily Telegraph, and no doubt soon to be assistant editor, Olivia. Phew. Miata Van Buller is Chief Executive of the New Economics Foundation. Now, they are here to take your calls. We'll take any subject you like. Obviously, I'm sure several of you have got opinions and questions on what Boris Johnson said in his conference speech today, but lots of other subjects around too as well. And of course, you can watch us on Global Player, the LBC website at lbc.co.uk, our YouTube and Facebook channels too.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Well, welcome to you all. Let's get on with our first question. It's from David in Enfield. Hello, David.
Good evening, panel. In the spirit of the day, my question is, how can this present Tory government call itself conservative? And I say that for three reasons briefly. According to the Office of National Statistics, real wages adjusted for inflation have just recovered to the levels last seen in 2007, pre the financial crash. So we've had 14 years of average weekly wage stagnation in real terms, no improvement in living standards. Secondly, despite a decade of austerity, the national debt increased from 1 trillion in 2010 to 1.8 trillion in 2019. We've now added another 400 billion due to COVID. So it now stands at 2.2 trillion, which is the highest level since World War II. And it's cost us 600 billion in interest in the last 10 years, which is 4 times the national health annual budget.
Okay, let's go on with the third one.
This has happened when the UK tax burden at 35% of GDP is at its highest level since 1948. We're working for the government now till the 1st of June. Stagnant living standards, record national debt, highest tax burden since 1948. How's that conservatism?
Longest question in the history of Cross Question there. Andrew Pearce, let's start with you. But before we go to that, what happened to you this morning? You were empty-chaired on Good Morning Britain. Did you oversleep, Andrew? Hard night, was it?
No, it wasn't so much that. It was my hotel just didn't... I arranged an alarm call with them and they didn't ring. And I set a call on my mobile as well, and that didn't work. So I woke up at 7 o'clock when I should have been, for just finishing my routine on Good Morning Britain. Did they send for you instead, Iain?
No, thank goodness they didn't. No, did you appear with Nick Ferrari? I think you were due on with him as well.
No, I missed him as well. Yeah, so that's why I'm making it up to the LBC family with you, Iain.
Well, we're delighted that you've made it with us. Right, answer the question from David in Enfield, Andrew.
Look, I have a lot of sympathy with what David says. At that Tory conference, Iain, it was very difficult to find anybody who supported the rise in national insurance next year. That's the tax rise, of course. There's going to be an increase in corporation tax too. And so it often doesn't feel like a very conservative government. And the speech today was magnificent speech by Boris. It was a barnstorming, bravura performance, but very light on policy and very light on how he's going to deliver this transformed new economy with high wages and high skills. So it re-established Boris Johnson's reputation as the foremost performer in the political establishment, but it did leave a lot of questions unanswered. And also, he did say in the speech, didn't he, a low tax economy. Well, when's he going to start cutting taxes?
Couldn't you have asked the same to Margaret Thatcher in 1981 when she put up taxes?
You could, but it was a different time. It was different. It was. We'd just been through the winter of discontent. The economy was in a very bad place, and she got a lot of criticism, of course, for putting up taxes in 81. Remember that letter from all those economists in the Times? She was proved right. She got most things right, in my view, Iain. But I'm not sure that putting national insurance up next year, when we've got soaring fuel costs, and a real cost of living crisis, I don't think that's the right time to be putting up taxes. And national insurance, of course, hits people the lowest paid hardest.
Okay, Miata, you're the professional economist on the panel. What did you make of, well, first of all, in terms of David's question, can the Tory party still call them Conservatives when effectively they're adopting uber Keynesian policies?
They are. And I mean, I think it's a strange government because I don't really know where they sit on ideology. You know, they're sort of pragmatic, which I think is actually a good thing in politics. I think the difficulty and the point that was made in the question is that actually we've had a decade of, in many respects, economic failure. You know, you can't have had 10 years in which living standards have budged, and that's a success story. It's not. There's obviously the question of the debts, and then there's a question of tax rises. So I think there's a backdrop of failure. I think you've got a Prime Minister who, it's not clear what his project is. You know, lots of chat about levelling up, Build Back Better, great. What does it all mean? And what's your compass? What are you trying to drive? It's still completely unclear. I think what is, for me, a bit of hope is, you know, I don't think we should be ideological about things. I think when there are big problems, whether it's climate change, whether it's living standards not budging, I want governments that try to fix those problems. And if that means that you lean to, you know, the traditional left, then so be it. If that means you say you invest, so be it. And I think that is the right mode, given the scale of the challenges that we face. I just wish that there was a bit more clarity about what on earth he's about and what he's trying to do for the country beyond the bluster.
I mean, going back in time a bit here, but how surprised were you when Rishi Sunak announced the furlough programme, for example, back in March last year?
Huge. I mean, I was cheering a Tory Chancellor because it was the right... because it was the right... I think it was the right intervention. You know, he looked at the scale of the problem. He looked across the continent. Germany, essentially in the last financial crisis, put in place a version of furlough. And they've been able to scale it up and scale it down. And in many respects, one of the reasons why they were able to respond so well and bounce back from the financial crisis is because they had it. And I think it was the right thing that the Chancellor wasn't ideological and actually did the right thing. And we are so much better and so much stronger for it. What worries me is that it feels like ideology is starting to kick in now. Because I think a lot of the decisions that we made, including the cut to UC, are born and driven by ideology rather than what makes economic sense and what's the right thing to do. And for me, that is a step backwards because I think he got it right a lot of the times in the pandemic. Not always, didn't go as far as I wanted, but he got some of the core interventions right.
Now, Olivia, I'm going to take a risk here because I think that your grandfather was T.E. Utley, am I right?
Yeah.
Thank goodness for that. I mean, he was a great conservative philosopher. Now, I don't know if you've inherited his philosophy expertise, but when you look at the current Conservative Party, what do you think he would have made of the current Conservative position?
Oh, goodness. Never met him.
I did.
Oh, good. Everyone else seems to have done. I think that, I mean, it would worry most Thatcherites. It's true that Margaret Thatcher pushed up taxes in 1981, but as Andrew says, the situation was very different. And what Thatcher did do was really support business, let business get on with what business is supposed to do. She talked a lot about the make the cake bigger and don't worry too much about how you're sharing it out. If there's a cake bigger, if there's a big cake, there'll be lots to go round. And I think Boris is sort of trying to invoke that spirit of Thatcher. He talked about her today, and he talked about capitalism unashamedly, which was quite nice to hear a Conservative Prime Minister do, because we haven't seen that for quite a long time. And of course, last year he talked about greed as a good thing because it's driving. So all of this sort of rhetoric is quite good and quite positive. And I think a sort of classic Conservative ideology, which Thatcherites would sort of admire. But then when it comes to the practicalities, he's just put up taxes the most since any Prime Minister since the war. And that is just so unconservative that sort of any amount of bluster and talking. And I agree that it was a fantastic barnstorming speech, and I was getting furious with Boris Johnson, but I couldn't help laughing, and I kind of just liked him watching that speech. But I just think if you're going to do a tax rise like that, it sort of cancels out everything else. So I think most sort of classic Thatcherites would be pretty fed up with him, really.
Darren Rodwell, you are not a classic Thatcherite, but you were. We met at the Conservative Party conference this week. What on earth was a leader of a Labour council, as Neil Kinnock might have said, doing at the Conservative Party conference?
Because a Labour leader goes where his people need him to go. And
follow the money.
I've got to go where the business is. And I managed to see 4 ministers in 36 hours. So hopefully that's good business, because actually we have a lot of opportunity. Now, what's really interesting, you talk about conservatism. I think what you've got is Borisism, because Boris is a bigger brand than what you're seeing within the Conservative Party. So he can get away with doing different things that are unconventional because his brand is so strong. And I think that's what's caused Labour a problem over many years. Now, my problem is, and, you know, we hear all the different bits, but if I take my borough, last April I had 14,000 families on UC. This April just gone I had 35,000 families. After last week we are predicting over 50,000 families. So that's 1 in 3 families that will be unemployed in my borough who have just lost £1,000 annually. That is massive.
And it doesn't just affect them, does it? Because if they haven't got the money, they can't spend it in local shops.
They can't pay their rent. Remember, in London, our rents are astronomical for poor families. So the fact that we are the poorest borough in London, 50% of my children live in, poverty. Absolutely.
When you say your children?
Well,
in your borough?
All the children in my borough are my children. I can go to jail for them, so they're my children. So I look after them, or try to. So that's why I was there, and I want to try and be as productive as we can. And I do agree. Some of the things we had to do, furlough was the right thing. How it stopped, I don't think is been the way it should have happened, because it's just caused me at a local level a massive issue, and it's caused actually the country a massive issue, because what we're actually seeing now is it doesn't matter where you are in the country, poverty is really rearing its head in a way that we haven't seen since the 70s, since those dark days of fuel crisis and 4-day weeks. And I remember that
3-day weeks.
Well, 3-day weeks. It was terrible.
That's what radicalised me into politics.
Well, mine was beating the BNP, but we all come in it for different reasons.
I remember interviewing Nick Griffin in a council house in Barking in about 2009 when they were I think that it was the time of the by-election, I think. So, and when you meet a Tory minister, I mean, what's your approach? How you're basically holding out your begging bowl, aren't you? How do you persuade them to?
No.
Aren't you not?
No. So let me put it this way to you. No one's got more opportunity than we have as a single borough. So I'm going to build 50,000 homes over the 20 years. That's needed. London needs it, Barking and Dagenham needs it. 85% of the houses I'm building are going to local people, which is really important because 1 in 3 are paying market rents, and we build all under that. So there's an opportunity. We can help rebuild the economy. At the same time, we've got the only international freight terminus in London. That means it can go to the whole of Europe, the whole of Asia and Africa. Well, that's massive for the UK economy. So I need the Conservative government to invest into that. We've just done the Freeport announcement with the Thames Freeport. Well, that's massive for the whole region. So I'm not going there with a begging bowl. What I'm going there with is the opportunity to do business, but do business for my community, that works for my community with my values, because they are different to other people's values. But if we can find a middle ground, again, this is not, we shouldn't have student politics when we're talking about people's lives. We're in the same place we were after the war. After the war, we had the biggest house building programme. We managed to bring in a new state support system financially. We also brought in the National Health Service, and with that, it was great for generations after. Well, I think we're in that space again. So how do we do cross-party working like we do in London? So I'm also Deputy Chair of London Councils, and it's a cross-party organisation, and we work together to better London's opportunities.
Andrew Pearce, you listened to Darren there. Do you think that message will be heard by Tory ministers?
Yeah, I think so, because look, levelling up isn't just about the north, is it? It's got to main places like Barking and Dagenham, which have traditionally, I mean, my mum's from Dagenham. She's not with us now, but she was brought up in Dagenham. I know the area well. It's been traditionally a poorer part of the southeast, and so housing is a key part of levelling up. And so I hope ministers do listen to him. He was very persuasive just now, Iain. So I'm quite sure he was persuasive when he talked to the ministers.
Well, I'll tell you what, if he's persuaded you, he's done a great job. Right. Thank you very much to David in Enfield. I think we got your opinions from your question, David, so I'm not going to come back to you, if you'll forgive me. We'll move on in just a moment. You're listening to Cross Question on LBC. It's 18 minutes past 8.
LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
21 minutes past 8, our panel tonight, Andrew Pearce, Miata Fanbulle from the New Economics Foundation, Councillor Darren Rodwell from the London Borough of Barking and Dagenham, he's the leader of the council there, Olivia Utley is Assistant Comment Editor at the Daily Telegraph. Now, if you've been listening to our conversation during the break, I think I'm going to try and reprise it now because it's really interesting, because Miata, tell us what you thought of Boris's speech. Sorry, I should say Boris Johnson's speech rather than Boris's speech generally.
I thought it was completely incoherent. I thought it was complete waffle. Couldn't follow it. I just thought it was awful.
Olivia Utley.
I really enjoyed it, I mean, I can see why, if you're a professional economist and you're listening to sort of go through and watch out for the policies coming up, it was not like that at all. But from an enjoyment factor, it was great. And you did get the gist of what he was sort of going for. And I think that's what most people are kind of watching it for. You got the person he was trying to be, you got the message he was getting across. There was some sort of substance there, but it was very light on the detail. And I think I see what you mean by all over the place.
And Andrew, you called it barnstorming earlier. Can you see why, say, people in professional politics or professional commentary might have seen it through a very different lens?
Oh, completely. It was completely about Boris. The whole conference, actually, Ian, was about Boris Johnson. Every other minister was restricted to 7 minutes. They had to speak in a smaller hall on a smaller stage. So it was all about the big main event, which was the speech today. 45 minutes, much better length than that dreary dirge we had to put up with Keir Starmer last week. But it was just theatrical. There was very little detail in there at all, which is why I should think economists are in despair. And a lot of Tory MPs will be a bit in despair. But I think also, Ian, they'll think it was a great performance, full of boosterism, full of optimism, which is what Keir Starmer absolutely manifestly lacks. And that plays well with the public, with the voters. I think they still think he's box office with the voters.
And Darren Rodwell, in Barking and Dagenham, I mean, I'm not sure whether that's classified as the Red Wall or not, because there's still very safe Labour seats there, or at least certainly in the Barking bit. What do you think that your voters there made of it? Because the Conservatives in the last election got 47% of the working class vote, 32% went Labour. There will be people in your area who quite liked it, probably.
They would have liked it because he's a great showman, and there's nothing wrong with that. He was a great showman when he was.
I feel a song coming up.
No, but look, you've got to take your hat off to the Prime Minister. He knows what his audience is, and he knows how to rile the audience, and I won't disagree with that, because actually we're all actors in our own way. You know, when I was fighting the BNP, and taking the abuse, the death threats and everything else, I was still standing there saying, come on then, if you want to carry on, let's carry on. But I'm gonna give you my version of the events. If you look at the substance, and I can understand why some people are going, wow, what was all this about? Actually, from what I've read, coming here this evening, there was 8 things he said that were not true. Now, that can be for debate and conversation. I've not seen it all, but what I saw of it was entertaining. And people at this moment in time, remember, we've just gone through a world pandemic. They want hope. They want inspiration.
Did you get that from Keir Starmer last week?
Personally, of course I did, because I was there. I was in the hall. It was a much better... It was so well received in the way that actually it was the first time you actually heard his story in a way that actually could connect with people. So yes, he's not going to be Boris Johnson because he's a different character. But actually, when you actually looked at what he was saying, there was a lot more substance to it about his world.
Let's
That's very important.
Go to another question. It's from Anthony in Blackpool. Hi, Anthony.
Hello, Ian. I'm phoning from Blackpool South, one of the UK's most deprived constituencies. It's been subjected to severe austerity cuts. Currently, the mortality rates are 20 years below the national average. My question is, how can Johnson blithely talk about levelling up when the government's taking £83 a month off the most disadvantaged people in the country who aren't having the time of their life?
Did you not hear the section where he talked about Blackpool and he said, look, in Ribble Valley, 30 miles down the road, the life expectancy is so much higher than it is in Blackpool, and he said he wanted to do something about that.
But the austerity cuts over the last 10 years, it seems essentially it's all talk and no action. People here are dying 20 years before everybody else. It's all intention, but there's no action.
Okay, well, Miata, this is, I mean, life expectancy in different parts of the country. If you look at Glasgow, for example, I think the male life expectancy there is something like 58 to 60 years, which, I mean, is appalling. Now, this is a long-term thing. It's not something that's been done in the last 10 years. This has been happening for decades. Do you think the levelling up agenda, however you define it, can do something about this sort of thing?
So, there's a lot of work that looks at the sort of determinants of health, and poverty and living standards is a big part of that. And, what we've seen is, yes, a lot of this has been decades in the making, but the last 10 years, in some places, life expectancy is going back. Which is different, which is a turning point. So something has happened, and I think it's the combination.
Can we just quantify that? Because I think I'm right in saying that it's not going back. The rise in life expectancy has been stopped, so it's not actually dropping.
Yet.
Am I right on
yes,
that?
That's right. That's right. But having made progress year on year, we're now stalling. Yeah. And I think it's being driven by two things. One is the fact that we have seen living standards basically stagnate for a decade, which is, it's historic. It's never happened before. And then I think the second thing is you combine that with the fact that, the social protection, so people talk about public sector investment, but it's all there to provide social protections for people, whether that's investment in health, social care, whether that's, your social security system. And we had 10 years where that was chipped away. So it was the combination of those two things. At the very time that people were being squeezed was not the time to pull the rug from underneath them. And the combined effect of that, poorer people struggling, is the thing that's feeding through the numbers. So yes, long in the making, but we certainly haven't helped over the last decade.
Olivia.
I think that this is going to be a big problem for Boris, because we are actually now 2 years into his 80-seat majority, and he talked about levelling up on that steps of Downing Street speech, and he had this big vision, but we're getting sort of halfway into the parliamentary term and he hasn't done very much yet. To give him its due, he has had a pandemic to deal with, but when you've got COVID hitting areas like Blackpool much harder than other places, then he's sort of got to do something soon. And I think the problem still is that there are still not really meat on the bones of the levelling up agenda. And you've got sort of, I heard Michael Gove do a very eloquent description of sort of what levelling up is in theory, but we should have reached that point a couple of months after the election, and we should now be having sort of policies in place which are doing something which will change the mortality rate in Blackpool, for example, sort of 15 years down the line. And I think the other problem for Boris is that because he loves being popular, he loves being loved, and policies which don't give that sort of immediate gratification don't appeal to him that much. So, I mean, for example, planning reform, if we tore up our extremely complicated planning system and sort of started again, it would have dividends far down the line, but it wouldn't have dividends immediately. And so Boris looks like he's probably going to shelve it. Similarly, with sort of thinking seriously about how to improve life expectancy in some of the poorest places in the UK, it'll take a while for those changes to sort of be seen and come through, and for people to like Boris for it. It isn't a quick win. It's not low-hanging fruit. So I worry he might neglect it for a bit longer.
We'll hear from Darren and Andrew in just a minute, so I can go to the news on time for once. It's 8:30. Let's get the news headlines from Lucinda Horsley.
A malaria vaccine has been approved for use by the World Health Organization for the first time. It could save hundreds of thousands of lives, mostly in sub-Saharan Africa, where successful trials have been taking place in some areas. The Prime Minister says he wants to reshape the British economy, but has warned there will be difficult moments. Some unions have criticised his speech at the Conservative Party conference as being full of hot air. UK government travel advice not to visit 32 countries and territories has been dropped. The Foreign Office rules are slightly different from the red list, which is also due to be reduced tomorrow. LBC weather, heavy rain across much of Scotland and Northern Ireland overnight, drier elsewhere, a low of 10 degrees.
LBC Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
8:34 on LBC. Let me reintroduce you to my panel. My LBC colleague, Andrew Pearce, is with us. Miata Fambolo from the New Economics Foundation. Councillor Darren Rodwell, leader of the London Borough of Barking and Dagenham Council, and Olivia Utley, assistant comment editor at The Telegraph. We're in the middle of answering a question which has now gone off my screen. I'm trying to remember what it was. Can you remember what it was, Darren?
It was about life expectancy.
That's the one, in Blackpool. So the question from Anthony in Blackpool was, why is Blackpool's mortality rate the highest? Has this got anything to do with Tory cuts and the continuation of these cuts?
I think it's austerity has gone too far, and I don't think it's only happening in Blackpool. Again, in London, I can say in Barking and Dagenham. I think it's every tube stop from the city east, you lose a year in life expectancy.
Really?
And that's quite a stark thing to be able to.
So you want to stop in Aldgate, really, don't you?
You do, really, if you can help it. Where my in-laws live, that'd be great. But I don't want to live with the in-laws. I'm quite happy where I am, thanks.
They're probably listening.
They probably aren't. So I'm safe to say that. But no, like in truth, I think this is the biggest problem the Prime Minister's going to have, because there is a lot of showmanship. But levelling up isn't about showmanship. It's about hard work, rolling your sleeves up and making change happen. So, again, I'll go back to London because that's the place I know. As a London councils, we're a cross-party organisation and we understand these issues. It doesn't matter what flag you fly under because actually we're all challenged with the same particular issues.
I mean, what you're effectively saying is it's a bit like Churchill in the war saying to the Americans, Give us the tools and we'll finish the job. And local councillors are going to be absolutely crucial in the levelling up agenda, aren't they?
They are. So, look, people got to understand what councils are. We are the fourth emergency service, but we're not there with the blue light. We're there every day, 365 days a year, 24/7. We're the people that kept this country together through COVID. And people go, no, you didn't, the NHS. No, hold on. If it wasn't what the local government did to keep people in their homes, to make sure all that support was at their front door, the NHS wouldn't have coped. Government wouldn't have been able to do the vaccine rollout without local government support. So we are there as that glue that keeps society together. And as I say, it doesn't matter what flag you fly under because you have to do it collectively.
Well, when we met in Blackpool, I said to you I wanted to get more council leaders on this programme, and you are justifying my faith in that, and we will continue to do so. Andrew Pearce, very briefly from you if we can, why do you think Blackpool's mortality rate is higher than other areas?
Well, I think it's historic. It's been like it probably for many, many years. But I think it was really encouraging to hear a Tory Prime Minister talking about mortality rates in different parts of the country and saying that he wants to try and do something about it. And talking of councillors, we know that Michael Gove, who's in charge of the levelling up agenda, I think he's one of the most effective cabinet ministers Boris has got, has struck up a great relationship with Andy Burnham, the mayor of Greater Manchester. Burnham was praising Gove this week. So he thinks he's got something important to say and do about levelling up. And let's hope he's right, because they've got to get on with it.
Thank you very much, Anthony, for your question. Let's move on to Terry in Camborne in Cornwall. Hello, Terry.
Hello there, panel and Ian. Everybody okay?
We're all absolutely thriving.
I would just like to ask the panel, do they think that Macron, after the last couple of weeks, President Macron, after the last few weeks, do you still see Macron and France as an ally to Great Britain?
Well, this is on the back of the French government threatening to cut Britain's energy supplies, blockade the Channel Tunnel so we can't get goods for Christmas. This is all to do with the fishing dispute with Jersey more than anything, it seems. Olivia, it probably plays well to a domestic audience for Emmanuel Macron.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question. I'm sure, well, I think it does play well to a domestic audience, especially the AUKUS thing. I think that really infuriated the French, that Britain and America and Australia had clubbed together without France. France has sort of great submariners. They're proud of their maritime abilities and they didn't see why they were left out of that. So I think that does play well. But I think that France is still an ally. It's clear that France is still an ally. But Macron is just sort of behaves a bit like a petulant child, and it does make it seem a little bit as though he doesn't want to be friends with Britain. I actually think the way Boris Johnson deals with him is fantastic. Like, I loved the Franglo stuff. I know who's sort of some pompous people said, "Oh, it's very childish the way he does this, and he's not a serious leader, and he won't be taken seriously on the global stage, etc., etc." But actually, that's exactly what Emmanuel Macron deserves, a bit of sort of ribbing, and it made him look a bit silly, actually. Donnez-moi and break him. Come on, Macron, grow up, sort of thing. So I think that on a fundamental level, yes, the French are clearly still allies, and I think on the big things, Macron sort of will be there with the UK. But at the moment, it does sort of seem like he's throwing his toys out the pram at every possible opportunity. And I think patience is wearing thin, definitely in Britain. But I also think he's pushing it with NATO as well at the moment, Macron. And I think patience is wearing thin sort of globally. So I think some people might be quite glad to be rid of him, although the alternatives...
Well,
exactly.
The alternative could be my new friend Michel Barnier after my interview with him last week. Darren, what do you think about Monsieur Macron?
If I'm being honest, I don't know enough. I've got enough going on trying to run a borough. Look, at a national level, I think, as I said before, I think Boris Johnson is a good showman. I think Macron's doing the same. I agree. I think it's what he's doing. He's playing to his own audience. Whoever think elections come around and, what you've got to do and how you do it. I mean, we've seen that in many different countries. So I don't think for one moment they're not our friends. I mean, there's a lot of history. The last 100 years have shown that we've had to be close on lots of different subjects, and I had to think, well, hold on, why are we doing it with Australia and America but not with NATO? Because NATO has been that peacekeeping force all my lifetime and beyond. So without knowing the full detail, it's really, really difficult. But friendship shouldn't be broken over silly little posturing. If that was the case, none of us have had any friends.
Andrew Pearce, you're never guilty of posturing, are you? What's your view of Monsieur Macron?
He's been a huge sulky ever since Brexit. That's what this is all about. He's absolutely enraged by it. He couldn't believe that Britain voted to leave the European Union. And this silly dispute about, 30 trawlers have been denied access to fishing waters. It's ridiculous. And he's got an election to fight next year. The polls aren't looking very good for him. So Britain is a very good... he's beaten up Britain at every opportunity to play to his domestic audience. That's what it's all about. And I imagine, sadly, he'll probably win next year because I think he's completely ghastly.
And it's not like we haven't done it, is it, Andrew? I mean, I do believe some other people have done it in the elections. I don't know. I mean, looking at the national press and everything about what's happened with Europe, we're doing the same.
As the front of the Sun said this morning, he's taking the we. But I mean, it's quite interesting. Was it yesterday or the day before? I interviewed a French MP about the Jersey fishing dispute, because that's what I think this is mainly all about. And I said, look, the Jersey government has granted 75 fishing licences because all of those boats had come up with the requisite paperwork. They've proved that they were fishing in these waters before Brexit, but 47 haven't done that, despite the deadlines being extended. And I said to him, how many licences have the French authorities granted to the Jersey fishermen? He said, I do not know. I said, 2. I did not know that. And this is exactly what Darren said. It's posturing, isn't it?
Yeah, no, look, it's posturing, but I think it's posturing on all sides. I think we're all behaving quite badly, to be honest. And I take
Stand up for Britain, Miata.
I take a simple view, which is that we've generally got some enemies out there, and France isn't one of them. And we need our friends to be really close in a world where actually it's globally there are lots of threats. We are in a new age, cybersecurity. There are things that we should generally be fighting and worrying about. Our friendship with Europe, our friendship with, countries that have always stood shoulder to shoulder shouldn't be one of it. So why are you picking fights with your buddies when, my God, you need them by your side at the moment?
We're not picking the fight, are we?
It goes both ways. We have behaved as badly as they're behaving. All sides need to grow up.
How have we behaved badly?
I think a lot of the rhetoric around Brexit, getting out of Brexit, the threat that we're going to, throw up the Northern Ireland Protocol rather than negotiate a settlement, it's all nonsense. It's all bluster. And we are blustering with our friends when we should be standing shoulder to shoulder with them because there are other threats in the world.
Cannot believe you've accused Boris Johnson of bluster. I just can't understand that. Very bizarre. I think it's time to go to a break. It's coming up to 8:45.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on your radio and on Global Player.
Dominic Raab, Deputy Prime Minister, today is the day that the temporary uplift in universal credit is ended. People are saying that it will make a real difference. Are you absolutely committed that this was the right decision?
Universal credit uplift was always going to be temporary. We can't keep relying on the level of support. We've had £400 billion state support to see the economy, workers, the most vulnerable through this pandemic.
But it could be heat or eat for many people, Deputy Prime Minister.
I don't think that's right.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast.
With the British Airways American Express Accelerating Business Card. Check out the world.
LBC.
Matt
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
8:48. Let's go to Sarah in Hemel Hempstead. Hi, Sarah.
Excuse me. Good evening, Ian. Good evening to you all.
Hello. Hi.
I'd like to talk about housing, actually. I think Boris Johnson going on about increasing wages and so on, unless you do something about the cost of living, is a waste of time, really, because you could have all the increases in wages you like, but if you can't control the cost of the most basic things like housing, you could earn 100 grand a year as a teacher, but if you don't do anything about the housing, because 3 times your salary is the normal mortgage arrangement, so 300 grand, which would be the mortgage you could afford, would buy you a 2-bedroom flat in Watford. So, I mean, unless you do something about the housing and young people can't get on the housing ladder and so on, and it causes, interest rates will go up.
Okay, so Sarah, we need to get to your question because we're nearing the end of the programme.
So, I'm sorry. Do you think housing mortgages should be purely buy to live in, not buy to let mortgages? Because the long-term effects of this will be catastrophic.
That's an interesting one, because buy-to-let mortgages have sort of mushroomed over the last 10 or 15 years, I think. And the government has put extra stamp duty tax on buy-to-let mortgages. But what's it like in your area, Darren, in Barking and Dagenham?
I knew you was going to ask that. So in my area, it's actually massively changed the area. So the ward I represent is 72% buy-to-let HMO properties, which means 91% of the people that were there 10 years ago aren't there today. And across the whole borough, about one in three properties are buy-to-let or HMO.
Is that typical, or are you an untypical example?
Well, we've been an area where people wanted to invest because the properties were the cheapest in London, and you could get the highest yield. So for a normal, what would be a Becontree estate house, the one I live in and one others would have come from originally, council rent is about £500, give or take, and private rent now is about £2,000. So people, this is not a third of their income. So we need to change the whole way we do rental, and we do actually trying to buy asset. So I've always believed that you should be able to give people the right to rent, the right to invest, and the right to move, so we can take the stigma away. So I've always been, and this is where you won't like me here, but I hate the term social housing, because it is a derogatory term to say you're on the social, you can't afford to buy the house. And I think we're suffering for that 40 years on, because I think the market has been broken, and it does need a new way of government working together, national and local, to start building the next generation of what would be council housing that could help the whole of society without the stigma.
Andrew Pearce.
Well, the Chancellor, as part of his COVID package, gave us a stamp duty holiday, which all it did was just it lead to even bigger property price inflation, particularly in London and the South East. It's almost impossible now for young people to get a foot on the property ladder. It's a real problem, because I bought my first property when I was 19, and it was a noble aspiration. It was it was Thatcher's property-owning democracy, and the property cost me £19,000. A terrace house in Worcester, it would probably now cost £350,000. It's a real problem, and part of levelling up, isn't that all going to be to do with housing? I hope it is. We've got to build a lot more houses, but the great reform of planning is dead in the water ever since the Tories lost the Chesham and Amersham by-election. So I don't quite know where they're going to go forward with that policy.
Miata.
So, look, housing is a massive issue, and I think it's both people being able to afford homes, but also the problem with the rental market. We've got 1 in 5 people renting. That number is just going to keep going up because even if we fix the housing crisis, it's going to take a while to feed through. And I think we actually need quite a radical view on this. I think you don't fix the crisis without building more homes, and we need to have buckets loads of council-led and housing association-led homes that are accessible to a whole load of people who at the moment are locked out of it. I think that has to be part of the solution, but also I think we need to look at the rental market, and we should be in a world where we're talking about long-term tenancies becoming the norm, where we're strengthening the rights of tenants, but we're also looking at, rent controls, dare I say it. But when you say, actually, in the way that we see in other countries, you index rent rather than extortionate rent rises or random rent rises. So I think you just need greater regulation of that market, because a home is a fundamental, basic thing that everyone needs.
Give me an example of why greater regulation of a market has actually expanded the market.
Gosh, I mean, look, you look across Europe, we have lots of regulated markets. So the water sector is regulated, the energy sector is regulated, even in this country is regulated. The question is, how do you get the balance of regulation right? And at the moment, we have a rental market. It doesn't matter, it's not an essential thing. But when it's something so fundamental and essential as what you live in, you do have to wonder whether it makes sense to just say, off you go. Like, leave it to the market. And actually, we should be providing a basic level of protection. Get it right, get the balance right, and it definitely can be done.
Olivia, are you worried by the expansion of the buy-to-let market? Because it really has mushroomed over the last 10 years, hasn't it?
It has mushroomed, and I think it is a bit of a worry, but I think that sort of tinkering with the buy-to-let market and stopping people who want to buy a house to rent it out, get mortgages, is really just playing with the edges. I think what we really need to do is build many, many more houses. And Robert Jenrick actually had a good plan for this. I think the Prime Minister was on the right track last year when he said sort of think big, think radically, look for huge solutions. But the Tories have got scared because of Chesham and Amersham. They don't like... There are just quite a lot of NIMBYs around who don't like the idea of more houses. And so they're sort of... It's really off-pushing if you're just shaking your head like that in the background.
It's just wrong. There's 1.1 million properties that have got planning permission today. Right? In London, there's a quarter of them, or 260,000, that have got planning permission today. The system, it wasn't broken in planning. In fact, 9 out of 10 planning applications get permission, right? What we were planning to do, though, and why I would disagree with the white paper, and I'm pleased there's a review of it, I'm not saying it was all wrong, but you've got to give local people the local say about their local area, because that's democracy. By not doing that, you're actually causing a real problem. Where I would say we've got a real problem is at this moment in time, I think we spend something like £23 billion on the housing payments. You know, that is the national cost to us. We're only spending $8 billion on actually building new housing. Now, that can't be good for our society. It's not good for the exchequer, and it's not good for community. So we do need to have a big house building programme. And I say that, someone who lives on the Becontree estate, the largest single house building programme. They managed 27,000 homes with all the infrastructure in 12 years, whilst they had horse and cart and steam trains. Now we're just not doing it because there's too much vested interest. It needs to be a national resource, and we need to work together.
I think this is one of those issues that we are really going to concentrate on my programme over the next few months, and hopefully we'll be able to get Michael Govin to sort of talk for a long time about it, because it is a complicated subject, it's a difficult subject, and you can't do justice to it in a sort of 5-minute section. Sarah, thank you very much for that. Now I'm going to restrict you all to 45 seconds in your answers to the next question, because we're nearly at the end. Mary in Southwark says on a text, Dominic Raab said earlier that misogyny is wrong whether it's a man against a woman or a woman against a man. Does the government just not understand the issue? Olivia.
Yeah, that was an incredibly stupid thing of Dominic Raab to say. I think he's probably right that making misogyny a hate crime, which I think this is what it was about, isn't a particularly good idea. It's one of those sort of virtue signalling policies which sounds nice but doesn't really do anything. And the people we've been talking about, Sarah Everard was murdered. That is already a crime. So I think he sort of had the right idea. But that was an incredibly stupid thing to say, and does sort of give the impression that the government just isn't really listening to women and doesn't quite understand what's going on.
Miata.
I think the quote speaks for itself. I don't think you need to say anything else.
Okay. Well, that gives the two men on the panel a bit more time then. Andrew Pearce.
Well, it was absolutely cringe-making, wasn't it? If he doesn't know what misogyny means, whether it was a misspeak or misquote, but it was shocking, actually. And I'm afraid women they've lost a huge amount of faith in the police and the justice system. And then you get the Prime Minister talking about women in his speech, and then you get the Deputy Prime Minister failing to even understand what misogyny is. It's very, very worrying, and yet another a question mark over why Dominic Raab is still around, frankly.
It was one of the few gaffes at this conference. Normally conferences are full of them, but I can't think of many others this week. Darren?
Well, again, as the borough that gave you equality,
yes, that's
it's
true.
It's really important. Yeah,
just explain that.
Well, Mary Wollstonecraft, obviously, she wrote the book about equality between men and women, and most of the republics have her work in there. You got the first women playwrights and Ethelberg, or you got the women of Fords in 68 and 84. So we've got a really proud history in this. I have to say that I'm disappointed someone in such a senior position makes such a silly mistake in a public way, and for once we will agree across the screen that I don't understand how someone can be in that position without knowing the basics about.
You do realise you've done something very bad on this programme over the last hour, Darren, because you've made Barking and Dagenham sound such a fantastic place that everybody is going to want to move there and the property prices are going to shoot up.
Well, the fact that we've got 2 film studios coming, we're going to be London's Hollywood, the fact that we've got the largest data centre in Europe with Digital Dagenham, the fact that we've got Barcelona on Thames down on the river, the fact that we've got Mini Manhattan, which will be Barking Town Centre, and you've got the road in Riviera where we're going to have the only women's museum. I think it's a great place to live.
And you got West Ham as well.
Of course, West Ham.
That's Newham, isn't it?
No. Hold on. We won the World Cup for the country. Bobby Moore and Sir Alf Ramsey came from Barking and Dagenham.
Absolutely right.
So there you go.
You are right on that.
I know.
Right, final question from Amanda in Brighton. Therese Coffey, the Work and Pensions Secretary, was videoed last night singing Time of My Life at the Tory conference karaoke evening. What's your karaoke song of choice, and would you like to sing a couple of lines of it? Andrew Pearce.
No, but it would be anything from ABBA, Ian, as you know. So probably it'd probably be Dancing Queen, but I'm not going to sing it. I can't massacre ABBA.
Have you got your tickets yet?
No, but I'm going to get them.
Have you not?
No.
Well, you need to speak to me. Miata.
Gosh, it would be anything Shakira, but I'm completely...
Shakira.
That's it, I'm completely tone deaf. I'm not going to subject anyone to listening to my voice.
Darren?
Oh, mine would be We Are the Champions.
Oh.
And because it means so much to so many people. And it takes me back to Live Aid.
Okay, you're not going to sing it either?
Not a chance.
The floor is yours, Olivia.
I was going to go for Dancing Queen as well, but ABBA, I'll go for Waterloo, but I'm not going to sing it.
Ain't nothing but a heartache. And that is the end of the programme. Thank goodness for that. I just sang it for you. Backstreet Boys. I want it that way. And Andrew Pearce, Darren Rodwell, Olivia Utley, Miata Fambola, thank you very much indeed. Very entertaining edition of Cross Question, which will, of course, be back with you next Monday at 8 o'clock on LBC. We will be talking a little bit more about Boris Johnson's speech after the news. We'll be getting your calls, your verdicts, because judging by social media, there is a definite split on, well, judging by this studio, there's a definite split, given what Miata just said. 0345 6060 973 if you'd like to deliver your verdict on Boris Johnson today. It's 9:01.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, Labour has accused Boris Johnson of failing to care enough about the issues affecting working families. There was only one new policy announced in the Prime Minister's keynote speech at the Conservative